Your introduction got erased from my phone. Just give it the title.
When modern technology wasn't so modern.
That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it still is. Please help me welcome up Toastmaster Nick Gandy for his speech, When Modern Technology Wasn't So Modern.
This is a 6 to 8 minute speech. With all the advancements we have today in technology, we often forget that nearly 25 years ago, things we take for granted today could be quite a challenge. I got my start working in sports media, and I'm now a 25-year sports media veteran working at Florida State University in the Sports Information Department. Now, this was a time when the Florida State football team was just bursting onto the national media scene. And the national media and the local media were evolving and took a real liking to Florida State's coach, ever the Southern gentleman, Bobby Bowden. Now, when I worked in the Sports Information Office, there were 5 full-time employees. And one of us was assigned to act as the liaison between the media and the team at every practice. So one of us was out there every day. And I was assigned to Wednesdays, which was usually a pretty heavy day for media and interviews. But being the up-and-comer that I was, I relished this challenge. Prior to one midweek practice, I was called into the boss's office and told of a huge opportunity that we were faced with. An Orlando television station was bringing up its new technology, a live truck, and was going to interview Coach Bowden live on the practice field. Now, there was a stipulation involved in this live interview, which would have occurred sometime between 5:30 and 6 on the nightly news, right in the middle of practice, as Gene probably knows. It could only last for no more than 2 minutes, because Coach Bowden couldn't be taken away from practice for that long. So, I, the young up-and-comer, was going to transport the coach from wherever he was to the live truck in a golf cart. Everything was set. Everybody agreed to it. The day came. It was a beautiful fall day in Tallahassee. A normal gathering of media was there. A few sports writers, a couple of maybe some local television, and one strategically placed live truck. And the golf cart. The golf cart, very important. Some assistant coaches had even been briefed to keep Coach Bowden posted as the practice went along. So as we stood and waited for the 5:30 news to begin, the reporter who was coming up with the truck was telling me about what a great opportunity this was, and his television station was the first one in Orlando to possess such technology. And I just stood there and kind of nodded. Well, finally the time came, and we were getting close to the beginning of the sports segment of the nightly news, and I went on my way in the golf cart. Coach Bowden saw me approaching in the golf cart and gave me the look, and at that time, buddy? I nodded, and he kind of begrudgingly walked over and got into the golf cart. Off we went. As we drove past groups of players, he kind of made a little note of what was going on in the practice and looked over his shoulder several times at what he had been missing. And when we got to where the live truck was parked, the reporter was told immediately, you know, this needs to happen quick. I got to get back to practice. The reporter nodded and he said, yes, Coach, they've just started the sports segment and it's only going to be about 20 or 30 seconds before we go live. So Coach Bowden stood there, fidgeting. The reporter had his microphone. He was gazing into the camera, listening on his earpiece for the cue from back at the station. Finally, he goes into some small talk with the sports anchor who's on the set back in Orlando, and he goes into his question to Coach Bowden. Coach Bowden begins with his answer, and 10 seconds into his answer, the reporter interrupts him and says, "Coach, I'm sorry, but we lost our live feed." The coach kind of rolls his eyes and looks over at me, the young upstart. The reporter apologizes and says, "Coach, it'll only take a moment to get things reset. Can we try this again?" Ever the gentleman, Coach Bowden agrees. He says, "But I'm going to step over here so I can see what's going on a little better." And my job at that time was to motion him back when everything was ready. So after what may have been one of the most uncomfortable minutes of my life, I motioned him back, and again, Coach Bowden is standing next to the reporter. He's got his microphone. He's listening to his earpiece, looking at the camera once again, but this time, he never starts talking. Coach Bowden looks over at me. The reporter looks over at me. Finally, Coach Bowden says, "This is going to work." The reporter tells him, "Coach, we had some trouble uplinking again." To which he finally says, "I'm sorry, but I got to get back to practice." The reporter apologizes and said, "I understand, Coach," and he and I make our way back to the golf cart. On his way over to the golf cart, he reaches into his back pocket and pulls out his notes that he always scribbled at practice, and the whole way over, he never said a word. He just looked at his notes and scribbled a little bit here and there, and I'm just waiting for him to say something, say anything. We finally get back to where I had picked him up, and he just calmly stepped out of the cart, stood for a minute, and then looked at me and says, "We won't do this again." And I said, "Okay." And while Coach Bowden was never a demonstrative type who hollered and screamed and got angry very quick, I was very surprised at his casual reply to our failed live interview. And then he just wandered over and started back with his practice and encouraging players along the way. And I drove back and found out that there had been some weather issues in Orlando from the reporter to let us know that that's why even though it was a beautiful day in Tallahassee, the uplink never occurred in the satellite revolving around the Earth. So we went on our business. The post-practice interviews went on as scheduled. Coach Bowden did other interviews, and never once did he mention the failed live interview to me. I went back to the office and was immediately surrounded by my coworkers. "How did it go? How did it go?" I told my story, and my boss said, "Well, what did Coach Bowden say?" I said, "Coach Bowden said, we won't do this again." And my boss said, "Well, by golly, if that's what the man said, we won't do this again." And over the years, I'm sure that Coach Bowden did hundreds of live television interviews where the satellite worked, everything happened the right way, the interviews went off, and everybody was happy. In my 25 years, I've even stood over to the side like I did that day and watched many a subject interviewed live from a location somewhere. Always went down perfectly. But Coach Bowden did not lash out at me, the young upstart that I was. And if he had, it may have ruined a promising career. But he was calm. He knew we all had a job.